I am Bernard, 70 years old, and I spent 45 years pouring concrete and framing houses to build a legacy for my family. My son Jason and his wife Tiffany saw my life's work not as a gift, but as an endless buffet they were entitled to feast upon. Last Sunday, during what was supposed to be a holy Easter dinner, my daughter-in-law decided that my refusal to house her bankrupt parents was an act of war. As the $80 Cabernet dripped down my forehead, mixing with my own blood, I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I simply checked my watch. It was 7:14 p.m. That was the exact minute I decided to disown them. But before I cut them off, I made sure they would regret every single drop of blood they spilled. Before I tell you how a shattered wine glass ended my relationship with my only son, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been called selfish for protecting what you earned. This nightmare didn't start with a bang, but with the clinking of silverware in my dining room. The air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and rosemary, a recipe my late wife used to make. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, a table I had crafted with my own hands 30 years ago. To my right sat Jason, my only son. To my left was Tiffany, his wife, who was currently swirling her wine glass with a look of calculated distress on her face. The conversation had been light, too light. I knew that tone. It was the calm before the ask. Usually it was for a new car lease or a vacation to the Maldives, because Tiffany was feeling burnt out from her part-time job as a lifestyle blogger. But tonight felt heavier. Tiffany sighed a long, dramatic sound that was meant to stop all conversation. She set her glass down hard enough to rattle the china. "It is just so unfair," she said, looking at Jason, then at me. "Mom and Dad are in a motel tonight, Bernie." A motel. Can you imagine? I took a slow bite of my dinner. I knew her parents, the Harrisons. They were people who spent money. They didn't have to impress people they didn't like. "I am sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I thought they sold the house in Florida for a good profit." Tiffany's eyes narrowed. "There were complications, Bernie. The market is terrible. They lost almost everything. They have nowhere to go." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I had heard rumors that the Harrisons were living large down south, buying boats and new trucks. If they were broke, it wasn't because of the market. It was because of their own stupidity. Jason cleared his throat. He looked pale, nervous. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad," we were thinking, "since you have so much space here. I mean, the house is massive. Here it comes," I thought. Tiffany leaned forward, her voice turning sugary sweet. "The east wing is completely empty, Bernie. It has 2 bedrooms, a private bath, and its own entrance. It would be perfect for them, just until they get back on their feet." I put my fork down. The east wing. That was the addition I built for my wife when she got sick, so she could look out at the garden she loved. It was her sanctuary. Since she passed, I kept it pristine. It was a place of memory, not a boarding house for grifters. "No," I said. "Simple. Direct." The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany blinked as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "Excuse me," she asked. I said no. I repeated, picking up my wine glass. "I am not running a hotel, Tiffany. I worked 45 years in construction, breaking my back in the freezing Chicago winters and the blistering summer heat. I built this home for my family, for my wife. I did not build it to house 2 irresponsible adults who squandered their own retirement." Jason slammed his hand on the table. "Dad, come on. That is incredibly harsh. They are family." "They are her family, Jason," I corrected him. "And you know as well as I do that Bob and Linda Harrison have never worked a hard day in their lives. If they need money, they can get jobs. But they are not moving into the East Wing." Tiffany's face began to turn a shade of red that matched the wine. "You are unbelievable," she hissed. You are sitting here in this mansion all alone hoarding rooms you do not even use. My parents are suffering. I looked her dead in the eye. I am not hoarding rooms. I am living in my home. The home I paid for. The home I pay taxes on. And frankly, Tiffany, I am tired of being the financial safety net for everyone in this room. That was the spark. Jason stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. You are being selfish, he screamed, his voice cracking. Always the same, isn't it? It is always about your money, your house, your rules. You have 5 empty bedrooms. What are you saving them for, ghosts? The disrespect stung more than I wanted to admit. I looked at my son. I saw a man of 40 who still acted like a child of 14. A man I had paid tuition for, whose car insurance I still covered, whose mortgage down payment I had provided. I am saving them for peace and quiet, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. And if you think I am selfish, maybe you should try paying your own bills for a month. Tiffany stood up then. She was trembling, not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed her wine glass. It was a large crystal goblet filled to the brim with the expensive Cabernet. You act like you are some kind of king, she shrieked. You are just a bitter, lonely old man. And then she threw it. She didn't toss the wine. She threw the glass. I saw it coming, but I was too shocked to move. The crystal goblet struck me right above the left eyebrow. It didn't bounce off. It shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. Shards of crystal flew across the table. For a second, I felt nothing. Then a sharp, searing heat sliced across my forehead. I sat there stunned. The warm, sticky liquid began to pour down my face. It dripped into my left eye, stinging and blurring my vision. I could taste it on my lips. Iron and tannins, blood and wine. Jason gasped, "Oh my God!" Tiffany. Tiffany stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still raised. She looked horrified for a split second, but then her face hardened again. "Look what you made me do," she muttered. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. The chaos in the room seemed to slow down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I pressed it to my forehead. It soaked through, instantly turning a deep crimson. I pulled back my cuff and looked at my watch. It was a sturdy steel dive watch I had bought myself when I retired. The glowing hands read 7:14 p.m. I memorized that time. 7:14 p.m. The moment my family died. I stood up slowly. The chair didn't make a sound. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest, freezing over the love I had held for them. "Where are you going?" Jason asked, his voice trembling. "Dad, you are bleeding. We need to clean that up." I walked past him toward the hallway where my car keys hung. "I am going to the emergency room," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Detached. Mechanical. Jason ran ahead of me and blocked the front door. He spread his arms wide. "Dad, stop. You can't go out like that. You are in shock. Let us just calm down." Tiffany didn't mean it. It was an accident. I looked at him. I looked at the blood on his shirt where he had tried to grab me. "An accident is when you drop a glass, Jason," I said. "Throwing a projectile at someone's head is assault." Jason's eyes went wide. "Assault? Dad, do not be crazy. You are not going to the police. You are not leaving until you agree to talk this out." He stood his ground, thinking he could intimidate me. He forgot who I was. He forgot that before I was an old man in a nice suit, I was a man who carried 80-pound bags of cement up ladders for a living. I still had the grip strength of a vice. I stepped forward and grabbed Jason by the shoulder. I didn't shove him. I simply moved him. I applied pressure to his collarbone and swept him aside like he was made of straw. "Get out of my way," I growled, or I will add unlawful imprisonment to the list of charges." Jason stumbled back, shock written all over his face. He had never seen me like this. He had never seen the wolf beneath the sheep's clothing. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the cool night air. My forehead was throbbing now, a steady drumbeat of pain. I walked to my truck, my trusty old Silverado that I kept perfectly maintained. As I started the engine, I saw Jason and Tiffany in the doorway. Tiffany was crying now, realizing the gravity of what she had done. Jason was shouting something, but the glass of the window muted his voice. I didn't look back. I put the truck in gear and drove down the long driveway. As I turned onto the main road, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My head was bleeding, but my mind had never been clearer. They thought this was just a fight. They thought I would cool off, come back, and write a check to fix everything like I always did. They were wrong. I reached for my phone, but I didn't dial 911. Not yet. I opened my messages and found the name Richard Moretti, my attorney and oldest friend. My fingers, slick with blood, typed out a message that would set the rest of my life in motion. Phase 1 complete. Tiffany assaulted me. Going to ER. I pressed send. The screen glowed in the darkness of the cab. I wasn't just a victim driving to the hospital. I was a general mobilizing his army. And as the lights of the emergency room appeared in the distance, I knew one thing for certain. The Easter dinner was over, but the real carving was just about to begin. The interior of my Silverado was silent save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the rhythmic thumping of the blood in my temples. I glanced down at the passenger seat. A single drop of dark red blood had landed on the pristine beige leather. It annoyed me more than the gash on my forehead. Leather could be cleaned, but the stain of betrayal that had just occurred back at the house was permanent. I reached for a napkin from the center console and dabbed at the seat, my movements precise and controlled, despite the throbbing pain that was beginning to radiate behind my eyes. Most men in my position would be panicking. They would be speeding, running red lights, hyperventilating into their phone as they dialed 911. But I was not most men. I was a man who had spent 40 years calculating structural loads and anticipating collapse. I knew exactly how much pressure a beam could take before it snapped, and I knew exactly how much pressure my family could take before they turned violent. Tonight, the beam had finally snapped. I did not drive straight to the hospital entrance. I pulled into a side street 2 blocks away, putting the truck in park. The street lamp overhead cast a sickly yellow glow into the cab. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The cut was deep, jagged, and ugly. It ran from just below my hairline to the middle of my brow. My left eye was beginning to swell shut. Good. It looked terrible. It looked like exactly what it was, a vicious assault on an elderly man. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady. I navigated to my encrypted messaging app and found the thread with Richard Moretti. Richard had been my lawyer since the 80s. He was the only man I trusted to bury a body, though in this case we were burying my son's future. I typed out 3 sentences. Phase 1 complete. Tiffany assaulted me. Going to ER. I watched the 3 dots dance for a moment before the message marked as read. Almost instantly a reply popped up. Document everything. Do not wash the shirt. I will meet you there in 20 minutes. I put the phone away. Phase 1. It sounded cold when I thought about it, but they had forced my hand. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was the culmination of 6 months of hell. As I put the truck back in gear and drove toward the emergency room lights, my mind drifted back to the start of it all. It began with small things. A missing gold cufflink here, $100 vanishing from my wallet there. I had thought I was becoming forgetful. I thought maybe age was finally catching up to me. But then I installed the audio recorders. Not cameras, just small high-fidelity voice recorders hidden behind the bookshelves and under the coffee table. I remembered sitting in my office late one night, headphones on, listening to Tiffany and Jason discuss me while I was supposedly asleep. They did not speak of me with love. They spoke of me as an obstacle. I heard Tiffany call me a senile old miser. I heard Jason laugh and agree, saying that I could not hold on to the purse strings forever. They were waiting for me to die. When I realized they were not just ungrateful but actively predatory, I went to Richard. We looked at the options. Evicting them would be messy. Cutting them off financially would lead to tantrums and possibly elder abuse lawsuits claiming I was mentally incompetent. No, Richard had said. If you want them out, really out, you need cause. You need them to cross a line that the law cannot ignore. You need a criminal act. So I waited. I became difficult. I said no to small requests. I criticized Tiffany's spending. I poked the bear, knowing that eventually the bear would swipe. And tonight, with a wine glass to the face, Tiffany had given me the golden ticket. I pulled up to the emergency room entrance. I left the truck in the drop-off zone, not caring about the parking rules. Let them tow it. I walked through the sliding glass doors, the fluorescent lights stinging my eyes. The triage nurse looked up, bored, until she saw the blood soaking the entire left side of my face and shirt. Her eyes went wide. "Sir, are you okay? What happened?" I leaned against the desk, letting my shoulders slump, letting the exhaustion wash over me. I needed to play the part. "I am not sure," I mumbled, my voice raspy. "My daughter-in-law." She threw a glass. It hit me. The nurse was on her feet instantly. "Code gray to triage," she said into her radio, rushing around the counter to guide me to a wheelchair. "We need to get you back immediately." The next hour was a blur of activity. They wheeled me into a private bay. A young doctor with tired eyes examined the wound. He whistled low under his breath. "That is a nasty one, Mr. Kowalski. You are going to need quite a few stitches. We need to clean this out thoroughly to make sure there is no glass embedded in the tissue." I nodded. "Do what you have to do." The cleaning was worse than the impact. The antiseptic stung like fire, but I welcomed the pain. It kept me sharp. It kept me angry. As the doctor began to sew me up, pulling the skin together with black nylon thread, a police officer entered the room. He was young, maybe 30, with a buzz cut and a notepad in his hand. "Officer Miller," he introduced himself. The nurse called it in as a domestic assault. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" I looked at the officer. I did not see a young man. I saw a tool, a weapon I could wield. I took a deep breath. My son and his wife were at my house for Easter dinner. I began keeping my voice steady and factual. There was a disagreement about money. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany Kowalski, became enraged when I refused to let her parents move into my home. She picked up a heavy crystal wine glass and threw it at my head from a distance of about 4 feet. It was not accidental. She looked at me, screamed insults, and then threw it with force. The officer was writing furiously. "And your son, Jason. Did he participate?" I paused. This was the hardest part. Jason had not thrown the glass, but he had blocked the door. He had tried to stop me from leaving. He stood by while his wife abused me for months. "He is an accessory," I said coldly. "He prevented me from leaving the premises after I was injured. He tried to physically restrain me. I had to force my way out." The doctor tied off the last stitch. 12 stitches. A nice round number. Officer Miller looked up from his notepad. "Mr. Kowalski, given the severity of the injury and the fact that you are over 65, this falls under felony elder abuse statutes in this state. Do you want to press charges?" The room went silent. The doctor stopped cleaning his instruments. The nurse paused by the door. They were all waiting for the answer. Usually parents protect their children. Usually they say it was a mistake, that they do not want to ruin anyone's life. But my life had already been ruined. My sanctuary had been violated. My trust had been shattered. I looked Officer Miller in the eye. I want to press full charges against Tiffany Kowalski for assault with a deadly weapon and elder abuse. I also want to file for an immediate emergency restraining order against both Tiffany and Jason Kowalski. I do not want them within 500 feet of me or my property. Officer Miller nodded, his face grim. I understand. We take this very seriously. I will need to take photos of your injuries for evidence. After that, we will dispatch a unit to your residence. I nodded and sat up straighter as he raised his camera. Flash. 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 Each burst of light was a nail in their coffin. When he was done, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I left the house. What happens now? Officer Miller holstered his camera and keyed his radio. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. Now, Mr. Kowalski, we go pick her up. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have a confirmed felony assault at the ER. Victim has requested charges. Suspect is at the residence. Send a unit to apprehend. I listened to the crackle of the radio, the voice of the dispatcher confirming the order. A sense of dark satisfaction settled in my gut. They were probably still at the house arguing, maybe trying to clean up the wine, thinking they had time to spin a story. They thought I was just an old man licking his wounds. They had no idea that the siren they would hear in a few minutes was not coming to help them. It was coming to end them. I lay back against the stiff hospital pillow and closed my eyes. The pain in my head was still there, but it was bearable now. Richard would be here soon with the paperwork. Phase 1 was indeed complete. The trap had been sprung. Now we just had to watch them thrash. The silence in the hospital waiting room was broken only by the hum of the vending machine and the distant murmur of nurses at the station. I sat there, a fresh bandage throbbing on my forehead, staring at my phone. I knew exactly what was happening across town at my house. I could visualize it with the clarity of a man who had built that structure from the ground up. By now, Jason and Tiffany would be in panic mode. They would be on their hands and knees, scrubbing the expensive hardwood floors with bleach, trying to erase the red wine and the blood before it stained the grain. They were not cleaning up a spill. They were destroying evidence. They probably thought they had gotten away with it. They likely told themselves that the old man was just being dramatic, that I would cool off, drive around for an hour, and come home to apologize for making a scene. They had no idea that a patrol car was turning onto our street, its lights cut to avoid detection until the last second. My phone buzzed against the hard plastic of the chair. It was a text from Officer Miller. Units have arrived. We are executing the warrant. I felt a cold, dark satisfaction settle in my chest. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of a structural engineer watching a controlled demolition. I had planted the charges, and now gravity was doing the rest. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene. I knew that Tiffany's parents, the Harrisons, were scheduled to arrive right about now. They would be pulling up in their rental car, luggage in hand, expecting a warm welcome and a free room in the East Wing. Instead, they were walking into a crime scene. I could almost hear the confusion in their voices as they walked through the front door, seeing their daughter with a rag in her hand and terror in her eyes. Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with Jason's name. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. I wanted him to feel the desperation. I wanted him to wonder if I was even alive. Finally, on the last ring, I swiped green and held the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened. Dad. Dad, pick up. Oh my God. The voice on the other end was high-pitched, bordering on hysteria. It was the voice of a boy, not a man. Dad, are you there? You have to stop this. The police are here. They are everywhere. I leaned back in the chair, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his panic. I know, Jason. I sent them. There was a pause followed by the sound of chaos in the background. I heard a radio crackle. I heard Tiffany screaming a shrill, indignant sound that I had heard too many times over the last 10 years. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am?" "My father is a lawyer." Then Jason came back on the line, breathless. "You sent them? Are you insane? They are arresting Tiffany. They have her in cuffs, Dad. In cuffs. Her parents just walked in. Bob and Linda are watching their daughter get treated like a criminal. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" I looked at the blood drying on my shirt cuff. "Humiliating," I repeated. "You want to talk about humiliation, Jason? Humiliation is having a wine glass thrown at your face in your own home. Humiliation is being told you are selfish for protecting your assets from vultures. Humiliation is bleeding into your dinner while your son blocks the door to keep you from leaving." Jason was not listening. He was too busy feeling sorry for himself. "This is a misunderstanding." She slipped. The glass slipped. You cannot put my wife in jail over a broken glass. You need to tell them to stop. Tell them you fell. Tell them anything." I let out a short, dry laugh. It hurts to laugh with 12 stitches in your forehead, but I could not help it. "You want me to lie to the police, Jason. You want me to commit a crime to cover up her crime. That is exactly why we are here. You have spent your whole life thinking there are no consequences. You think because I paid for your college and your car and your house down payment that I will pay for this too. But I cannot write a check to fix this." In the background, I heard Officer Miller's voice, firm and professional. "Ma'am, stop resisting, or we will add a charge. You have the right to remain silent." Jason's voice cracked. "Dad, please. She is crying. They are dragging her out to the car. The neighbors are watching. Mrs. Higgins is on her porch. Our reputation is ruined." "Your reputation," I corrected him. "My reputation is just fine. In fact, I think people will finally understand why I have looked so tired for the last few years." Jason exploded. "You are a monster. You are a vindictive, senile old man. You are doing this just to hurt us. You are doing this because you are lonely and miserable, and you want everyone else to be miserable too." I sat up straight. The time for the reveal had come. I had held this card close to my chest for months, waiting for the right moment to play it. "I am not doing this because I am lonely." "Jason," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as granite. "I am doing this because I am done being your bank account, and I am done being lied to." "What are you talking about?" Jason snapped. "I am talking about the $20,000, Jason." The line went dead silent. The screaming in the background seemed to fade away. The only sound was Jason's ragged breathing. I continued letting the words sink in like nails. "I know about the online gambling, Jason. I know about the debt you racked up on the sports betting apps. I know you borrowed money from your wife's parents to pay the interest, which is why they are broke and needed to move in with me. And I know that you have been skimming from the household account I set up for groceries to try and win it back. Dad, Jason stammered. "I can explain. It was just a bad streak. I was going to pay it back." "No, you were not," I said. "You were going to move the Harrisons into my house so you could use their rent money or lack thereof to cover your tracks. You were going to turn my home into a shelter for your mistakes. The disrespect tonight was not about the house. It was because you were cornered. You were desperate, and you took it out on me." Jason was sobbing now. A pathetic, broken sound. "Dad, please. I am in over my head. If Tiffany goes to jail, her parents will find out everything. They will kill me. You have to help me. Just this once." I looked at the exit sign above the hospital doors. It glowed a bright, hopeful red. "I have helped you every day of your life, Jason," I said. "And look where it got me. A scar on my face and a son who calls me a monster. I am done helping. You are a grown man. Figure it out." But where will you go? Jason asked, his voice trembling. You cannot go back to the house. It is a mess. I am not coming back to the house, I said. Not tonight. And not until the locks are changed and you are gone. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear him shouting, pleading, begging me to wait, to listen, to understand. But I had understood enough. I pressed the red button to end the call. Then I went into the settings and tapped the button that said block caller. The silence that followed was beautiful. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I walked out of the emergency room and hailed a taxi. The driver, an older man with a kind face, looked at my bandage but didn't ask questions. Where to? He asked. Take me to the peninsula, I said. He raised an eyebrow. The fancy one downtown? The very same, I replied. The ride to the hotel was smooth. I watched the city of Chicago pass by, the lights blurring into streaks of gold and silver. I had built buildings in this city. I had left my mark on the skyline. Now I was rebuilding my own life. When I walked into the lobby of the peninsula, the concierge did not look at my bloody shirt with disgust. He looked at me with concern and professionalism. I handed him my black credit card. I need a suite, I said. Ocean view. If you have it, though, I know we are on a lake, and I need a bottle of your best bourbon sent up. And one more thing. Yes, Mr. Kowalski, the concierge asked, typing rapidly. If a man named Jason Kowalski calls or tries to visit, I am not here. I am not to be disturbed by anyone. Understood, sir, he said, handing me a key card. I took the elevator up to the 35th floor. The room was magnificent. Heavy velvet curtains, a bed that looked like a cloud, and silence. Absolute, expensive silence. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there in a police precinct, my daughter-in-law was being fingerprinted. Somewhere my son was hyperventilating in a house he could not afford to maintain. I poured myself a glass of bourbon from the minibar. It burned, going down a good clean burn that matched the fire in my gut. I sat in the leather armchair and took a deep breath. Phase 1 was over. The enemy was in retreat. But as I swirled the amber liquid in the glass, I knew this was just the beginning. The real war, the war for my legacy and my company, was just about to start. And unlike Jason, I never gambled unless I knew the outcome. I took a sip and whispered into the empty room. Your move, son. The morning sun hitting the 35th floor of the peninsula was not warm. It was exposing. It cut through the sheer curtains and landed right on the manila envelope sitting on the marble coffee table. I sat there in a plush bathrobe that cost more than my first car, sipping black coffee that tasted like roasted nuts and victory. My head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, under the bandage a constant reminder of the glass that had shattered my family. But the pain was secondary. The primary sensation coursing through my veins was anticipation. Richard Moretti sat across from me. He looked as crisp and sharp as a new $100 bill. He did not look like a man who had been up half the night coordinating bail bonds and restraining orders. He looked like a shark in a pinstripe suit. He tapped the envelope with a manicured finger. You are going to want to sit down for this, Bernie, Richard said, his voice devoid of emotion. Although you are already sitting, so maybe you should pour a second cup of coffee. I put my cup down. I do not need caffeine, Richard. I need ammunition. Tell me what the private investigator found. Richard opened the folder. The sound of the paper sliding against the table was the only noise in the room. He laid out 3 documents side by side. They were bank statements and property deeds. Standard paperwork until you looked at the numbers. Here is the narrative your daughter-in-law spun last night, Richard began. Her parents, Bob and Linda Harrison, are destitute. The market crashed. They lost their home in Florida. They have nowhere to go but the street or your East Wing. I nodded. That was the story. the tearful plea that led to my injury. Richard pointed to the first document. This is the closing statement for the sale of their property in Boca Raton. It closed 4 days ago. I leaned in, squinting slightly. My eyes widened. The sale price was not a foreclosure amount. It was not a short sale. It was $650,000. Cash, Richard added. No mortgage to pay off. After closing costs and fees, they walked away with over $620,000 in pure liquid cash. It was deposited into a joint account at Chase Bank on Tuesday. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a dark, cynical thing. They have over $500,000 in the bank, I whispered, and they are sleeping in a Motel 6 to sell the poverty story. It gets better, Richard said, a thin smile playing on his lips. He slid the second document toward me. It was a glossy printout, an invoice from a luxury RV dealership in Tampa. This is a purchase order dated yesterday morning, Richard explained, for a Winnebago Horizon. It is a 40-foot diesel pusher. Marble floors, king-size bed washer and dryer on board. The sticker price is $400,000. I stared at the photo of the vehicle. It was a mansion on wheels. It was nicer than the first house I built for myself. They put down a $10,000 non-refundable deposit, Richard continued. They are scheduled to pick it up next week. I sat back, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a sickening thud. The plan was never to live with me permanently. The plan was to use my house as a storage unit and a free base of operations. They wanted to park their parents in my east wing so they could avoid paying rent while they waited for their luxury land yacht to be ready. And once they had the RV, they were going to travel the country, living the high life on the remaining $200,000 while I stayed home mowing the lawn and paying the utilities. I was not just a bank to them all. I was the help. I was the unpaid security guard for their stuff while they lived like kings. And Jason? Asked, my voice low. Does he know? Richard shrugged. That is the $1,000,000 question. Or rather, the $600,000 question. Either he is in on it, and he helped them orchestrate this con to get them into your house, or he is the biggest fool in Chicago, and his wife and in-laws are playing him just as hard as they are playing you. I looked out the window at the skyline. I thought about Jason. I thought about how he had looked at me last night, eyes full of accusation, calling me selfish. He had called me selfish for not housing millionaires. The irony was so thick I could taste it. It does not matter if he knows, I said, standing up and walking to the desk in the corner of the room. He is about to find out. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed, waiting for a command. I logged into my email. I started a new message. To Jason Kowalski. Subject, the poverty plea. Scan them, I told Richard. Richard pulled a portable scanner from his briefcase. Within minutes, the digital files were on my screen. The closing statement showing the cash windfall. The invoice for the luxury RV. I attached them to the email. I typed a short message. No greeting, no signature, just facts. Jason. Before you accuse me of destroying your family again, you should know who you are really fighting for. Your in-laws are not homeless. They are richer than you are. They sold their house for cash and bought a $400,000 RV. They wanted to move in to save money for gas. You are not a savior son. You are a dupe. Read the attachments. Then ask your wife why she threw a glass at my face to protect a lie. I hovered my finger over the send button. This was it. This was the moment I stripped away the excuse he had been clinging to. He could no longer hide behind the moral high ground. He could no longer say he was just trying to help family. I clicked send. The swoosh sound of the email departing was soft, but the impact would be nuclear. I sat back down on the sofa and looked at Richard. Now what? Now we wait, Richard said, closing his briefcase. If he has any spine left, he will leave her. If he has any brain left, he will apologize to you. I checked my watch. 10:00 a.m. Jason would be at the police station by now, or maybe meeting with a bail bondsman trying to scrape together 10% of whatever the judge set for Tiffany. He would check his phone. He always checked his phone when he was nervous. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence in the hotel room stretched tight like a piano wire. I expected my phone to ring. I expected him to call screaming that it was a fake or sobbing that he didn't know. I expected denial. I expected rage. But the phone remained dark. 30 minutes. The silence began to change. It shifted from expectant to heavy. It was a suffocating, dense silence. It was the silence of a man who had just realized that the ground he was standing on did not exist. It was the silence of total, devastating humiliation. "He is reading it," I said softly. "He is reading it over and over again." "He is looking at his wife," Richard said. "He is looking at her sitting in a holding cell, or maybe sitting in the car next to him. And he is realizing that the woman he married is a stranger." Or I said, a darker thought entering my mind. He is realizing that he is too weak to do anything about it. I stared at the black screen of my phone. That silence hurt more than the shouting match the night before. Shouting is engagement. Shouting means there is still a connection, however volatile. Silence is the death of hope. He wasn't calling because there was nothing to say. The truth was too big, too bright, and too ugly to argue with. I poured myself another cup of coffee, my hand shaking just slightly. The caffeine didn't help. The image of the RV invoice was burned into my retina. A $400,000 toy. And for a toy, my son was willing to let his father bleed. "Leave the file, Richard," I said. "I have a feeling I am going to need to look at it again." Richard nodded and stood up to leave. "You know where to find me, Bernie. Step 2 is securing the company assets. We do not want Jason doing anything rash with the business accounts now that he knows the gravy train has derailed." I didn't answer. I was still watching the phone, willing it to light up. Willing my son to be the man I raised to call me and say he was sorry that he was leaving them, that he was coming back to my side. But the phone stayed black. And in that silence I realized that the son I thought I had might be gone forever, replaced by a man who would swallow any lie just to keep the peace with a woman who despised him. The hook was in the lie was exposed, but the gut feeling told me the worst was yet to come. I turned to look at the door Richard had just closed. I was alone in a luxury suite, vindicated by the truth, yet entirely, completely alone. The knock on the door came exactly 45 minutes after I sent the email. It was not a confident knock. It was a hesitant scratching sound, like a dog asking to be let in out of the rain. I finished my coffee, placed the cup on the saucer with a deliberate clink, and walked to the heavy oak door. I checked the peephole. Jason was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, as if his legs could no longer support his own weight. He looked terrible. His shirt, usually pressed to crisp perfection, was wrinkled and half-tucked. His tie was missing. His eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. I unlocked the door and swung it open. I did not step back to invite him in. I simply stood there, a barrier he had to cross. He looked at me, then at the bandage on my forehead. He flinched as if the sight of my injury physically hurt him. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was dry, cracked. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Jason walked past me into the suite. He didn't notice the view of the lake or the luxury furnishings. He collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. I closed the door and locked it. I wanted him to feel the weight of the room. I walked over to the armchair opposite him and sat down, crossing my legs. I waited. I was good at waiting. In construction, you learn that rushing a foundation only leads to cracks later on. I read the email Jason whispered through his fingers, and I asked. He looked up. His face was a mask of confusion and betrayal. "Is it true, the money? The RV? Is it real?" I pointed to the folder on the table. The documents are right there. Certified copies. Your in-laws have $650,000 sitting in a Chase bank account while you were begging me to house them. They bought a luxury vehicle worth more than your first house while you were screaming at me for being selfish. Jason reached for the papers. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold them. He stared at the bank statement, his eyes scanning the numbers. He looked like a man trying to read his own death certificate. They lied to me, he said, his voice trembling. They looked me in the eye and told me they had nothing. Tiffany told me they were going to be on the street. I leaned forward. They played you, son. They saw a weak link and they pulled. They knew you would come to me. They knew you would fight their battle. And they knew that if they cried poor, you would feel obligated to save them. Jason crumpled the paper in his fist. I cannot believe it. I defended them. I fought you for them. I thought this was the moment. I thought this was where he would stand up, apologize, and tell me that he was done with the lies. I thought he would ask how to fix things between us. But I was wrong. I had underestimated the depth of his dependency. Jason took a deep breath. He looked at me and his expression shifted. The shock faded, replaced by a desperate, pleading look that made my stomach turn. Dad, look. They are wrong. What they did is terrible. And I will deal with Bob and Linda. I promise. I will make them leave. But what, I asked, my voice hardening. But Tiffany is a mess right now, he said, the words tumbling out fast. She is in a cell, Dad. She is terrified. She didn't know about the money. I am sure of it. Her parents manipulated her just like they manipulated me. She is a victim here too. I stared at him. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She threw a glass at my face, Jason. That was not manipulation. That was rage. That was violence. I know, he cried, leaning forward. And she is sorry. It was a reflex. She was stressed. She thought her parents were homeless. She snapped. But you cannot leave her in jail. You have to drop the charges. I sat back, stunned. Even with the evidence of the financial con staring him in the face, even with my blood on his conscience, he was still choosing her. He was still making excuses. You want me to drop the charges? I repeated slowly. Yes, Jason said, nodding vigorously. Just drop them. I will handle the rest. I will make sure her parents never set foot in your house. We will get counseling. Just please call the DA. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If she gets a felony record, it will ruin her life. It will ruin us. I looked at my son, really looked at him. And suddenly, the memory hit me. It was 10 years ago. We were standing in the funeral home looking at his mother's casket. My wife, the love of my life, was gone. I was broken, barely holding myself together. And Jason. Jason wasn't crying. He was standing next to me, whispering. Dad, did Mom update the will regarding the lake house? I remember we talked about putting it in my name for tax purposes. I had brushed it off, then thinking it was grief talking. But now, looking at this 40-year-old man begging me to save his abuser, I realized the truth. Jason wasn't just weak. He was complicit. He didn't care about right or wrong. He cared about comfort. He cared about the path of least resistance. He would let his wife assault me. He would let his in-laws rob me as long as his lifestyle remained intact. He was a parasite just like them. He just happened to share my last name. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Jason flinched again. No, I said. Jason blinked. What I said no, I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet suite. I am not dropping the charges. I am not calling the DA. Tiffany assaulted me. She drew blood. She is going to face a judge, and she is going to face the consequences. Jason stood up, his face flushing red. You can't do this. You are destroying my marriage. Your marriage is already a sham. Jason, I shot back. You are married to a woman who hits your father and lies about her finances. If you want to stay in that burning building, that is your choice. But do not ask me to hand you a bucket of water." Jason clenched his fists. "If you do not drop the charges, I will never forgive you. I will cut you off. You will never see your grandchildren if we ever have them." I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "You are going to cut me off?" "Jason, look at yourself. You are wearing a suit I paid for. You drove here in a Range Rover I make the payments on. You live in a house where I put down the deposit. You have never stood on your own 2 feet a day in your life." Jason froze. The color drained from his face. "You want to play hardball?" I asked, walking over to the desk. I picked up my phone. "Let us play. As of this morning, I have instructed my accountant to cancel all supplementary credit cards issued in your name and Tiffany's name. The black Amex gone. The gas cards gone." Jason's mouth fell open. You can't. I am not done, I continued, my voice relentless. "The lease on the Range Rover is in my name. I am terminating it. You have 48 hours to return it to the dealership, or I will report it stolen. And the monthly allowance I send to your joint account to help with household expenses, that ends today." Jason looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back. "Dad, please. We have bills. We have a mortgage. We can't survive without that money." "Then get a second job," I said coldly. "Or maybe ask your wealthy in-laws for a loan. They have plenty of cash." Remember, Jason stood there, stripping of his arrogance, stripped of his safety net. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. "Because I love you enough to stop funding your destruction," I said. "And because I respect myself enough to stop paying people to abuse me. Now get out." Jason stared at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw that the bank of Dad was not just closed, it had been demolished. He turned and walked to the door. He didn't slam it. He closed it softly, like a man leaving a funeral. I stood in the center of the room, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. My heart was breaking, but my head was clear. I had just cut off my own arm to save the body. It was necessary. It was survival. But as I looked at the closed door, I knew that Jason wouldn't learn. He wouldn't leave her. He would go back to Tiffany, they would blame me, and they would try to find another way to survive. I walked back to the window. I had to be ready. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered animal with a taste for luxury is lethal. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard. "He just left," I said. "Lock down the company accounts. And Richard, get a forensic accountant. I want to know where every dime of the business money has gone in the last 2 years." "Why?" Richard asked. "Because he didn't fight for me," I said, watching the traffic below. "Which means he is fighting for himself. And I have a feeling he has been fighting dirty for a long time." The silence in my house was not the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary, but the heavy, suffocating stillness of a tomb. I pulled my truck into the garage, the sound of the engine echoing against the concrete walls that I had poured myself 30 years ago. For the first time in decades, the space beside me was empty. No Jason's car, no Tiffany's convertible. They were gone. My lawyer Richard had informed me an hour ago that Tiffany had made bail. Her parents had put up the deed to their new RV as collateral, a foolish move that made me shake my head. But the restraining order was in effect. They could not come here. They could not call. I was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost in my own home. I walked to the front door, the keys heavy in my hand. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The air was stale. The cleaning crew I hired had done their job. The red wine stain on the dining room wall was gone. The shards of crystal had been swept away. But I could still see it. I could still see the arc of the glass flying toward my face. I could still see the hatred in Tiffany's eyes. I touched the bandage on my forehead, a physical reminder that the family I thought I was building was actually a demolition crew waiting for the signal to detonate. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not go to the bedroom. I went straight to my office. This room was the nerve center of my life. It was where I kept the blueprints of every building I had ever constructed and the financial records that proved I had won the game of capitalism. I walked across the Brazilian cherry wood floors I had laid with my own hands, kneeling for days until my knees were bruised and swollen. I knew every grain, every knot, every imperfection in this wood. That was why I stopped dead in my tracks 3 feet from the wall. There was a scratch. It was not a normal scratch from a moving chair or a dropped pen. It was a deep, jagged gouge in the finish cutting through the sealant and into the raw wood. It was fresh. The wood underneath was still pale, not yet darkened by oxidation. I knelt down, running my calloused finger over the mark. It was curved. It looked like the result of something heavy being dragged and then slipping. I followed the trajectory of the scratch. It pointed directly toward the large oil painting of the Chicago skyline that hung behind my desk. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud. I stood up and walked behind the desk. I gripped the frame of the painting. It was heavy, but it swung out on its hinges smoothly. Behind it was the wall safe. I felt the blood drain from my face. The dial of the safe was battered. There were deep scratches around the combination lock marks made by a screwdriver or a chisel. Someone had tried to pry the faceplate off. They had failed, of course. This was a TL-30 rated safe designed to withstand tool attacks for 30 minutes. But the attempt was clear, and it was recent. There was a fine dusting of metal shavings on the floor that the cleaners had missed. I stared at the safe. Inside were the deeds to the construction company. Inside were the bearer bonds I had bought in the 90s. Inside was the original copy of my will. They didn't just want to live in the East Wing. They wanted everything. I realized with a sickening clarity that the argument at Easter dinner wasn't the beginning. It was the distraction. While Tiffany was screaming at me while Jason was blocking the door, had they planned to come back here later? Or had they tried this days ago when I was out inspecting a site? I closed the painting. The rage I felt now was different from the anger at the dinner. That was hot, explosive anger. This was cold. This was the calculating resolve of a man who realizes there is a thief inside the perimeter. I picked up the phone on my desk. I didn't dial Jason. I dialed the only man who could secure this fortress. "Mike," I said when the voice answered. "It is Bernie. I need you at my house in 20 minutes. Bring the commercial-grade hardware." Mike was a locksmith I had used on my commercial sites for 20 years. He didn't ask questions. He just asked what I needed. "I want everything changed," I told him. "Every exterior door, every interior lock. And Mike, I want biometric scanners on the master bedroom and the office. Fingerprint only. No keys, no codes. If it doesn't have my pulse, it doesn't open. And one more thing," I added, looking at the bookshelf. "I need cameras. The hidden ones. The ones we used at the warehouse when we had the internal theft problem. I want them in every common room. And I want 2 in the office. Today." By the time Mike arrived, I was already moving. I went through the house, checking every window, every latch. I felt like a stranger in the home I had built. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a betrayal. While Mike drilled into the doors, installing high-security deadbolts that snapped shut with the sound of a prison cell closing, I sat at my desk. My mind was racing. If they had tried to break into the safe, they were desperate for documents. Or cash. Cash. Jason was the CEO of my company in name, but I still held the majority shares. However, he had signing authority on the operating accounts. I had given it to him 5 years ago, a gesture of trust, a way to let him feel like a big shot. I grabbed the phone again. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. I dialed Richard. Bernie. Richard answered. I am working on the restraining order paperwork. Did something happen? They tried the safe, Richard. I said, my voice low. What I found, tool marks on the wall safe. They tried to pry it open. They were looking for the deeds, Richard. Or the bonds. There was a moment of silence on the line. That changes things, Richard said. That is attempted burglary. We can add that to the charges. Forget the charges for a second, I snapped. Richard, if they were desperate enough to take a chisel to a steel safe in my own house, what else have they touched? I need you to open the company books, I said. Right now. Not the quarterly reports Jason sends me. I want the raw transaction logs from the bank. I want to see every dime that has moved in or out of Kowalski Construction in the last 24 months. Bernie, it is late. The banks are closed. I don't care, I roared. Use your online access. You have the power of attorney. Log in. Check the operating account. Check the reserve fund. Check everything. I heard Richard typing in the background. Okay. I am logging in now. Give me some time to go through the ledgers. It is a lot of data. Call me back the second you find anything, I said. Anything, Richard. Even a $10 error. I hung up. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I watched Mike install the cameras. Tiny pinhole lenses hidden in the eye of a deer mount in the spine of a book in the smoke detector. I watched him program my fingerprint into the new lock on the office door. The scanner beeped green, accepting me the master. I sat in the leather chair, staring at the silent phone. The sun began to set, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. The scratch on the floor seemed to glow in the dim light, a scar on the face of my legacy. I thought about Jason. I thought about the little boy who used to follow me around job sites with a plastic hard hat. I thought about the teenager who asked for a car. I thought about the man who stood by while his wife assaulted me. Was he capable of this? Was he capable of stealing from the very company that put food on his table? The phone rang. The sound was sharp, piercing the silence. I snatched it up before the first ring finished. Bernie Richards' voice was different. It wasn't the confident voice of a lawyer. It was the hushed, serious voice of a friend delivering bad news. Tell me, I said. Bernie, you need to sit down. I am sitting, Richard. Spit it out. We have a problem, Richard said. A big problem. I am looking at the operating account for the last 2 years. There are withdrawals, Bernie. Hundreds of them. Withdrawals for what? Materials, labor. No, Richard said. These are cash withdrawals. ATM limits maxed out every single day. Checks written to shell companies that do not exist. And wire transfers to offshore accounts that look like online gambling sites. How much? I asked. I felt a cold numbness spreading from my fingertips up my arms. Richard exhaled a sound of pure disbelief. Bernie, the reserve fund is almost gone. The operating capital is down to fumes. I am still tallying it up, but just at a glance. We are looking at over $250,000. The room spun. $250,000. My retirement. The company's safety net. The money I had saved for a rainy day. It wasn't raining. It was a hurricane. He didn't just break my heart, Richard, I whispered into the phone. He broke the bank. I looked at the camera lens hidden in the bookshelf, the red light blinking slowly. I was recording an empty room, but the real crime had already happened right under my nose, signed with my son's name. Get the forensic accountant, I said, my voice sounding like gravel. And Richard, do not tell Jason we know. Not yet. Why? Richard asked. Because I said, staring at the scarred safe. I am going to set a trap, and I want to see if he walks into it. The digital clock on the wall of my home office read 2:00 a.m., but neither Richard nor I had yawned once. The coffee pot was sitting empty on the side table, a dark stain at the bottom, the only evidence of the caffeine that was fueling this nightmare. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the smell of old paper and the metallic tang of betrayal. We were not looking at blueprints anymore. We were not looking at the future of Kowalski construction. We were looking at a crime scene displayed row by sickening row on Richard's laptop screen. Richard adjusted his glasses, the blue light from the monitor reflecting in the lenses, making him look ghostly. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, just clicking, scrolling, and occasionally letting out a sharp exhale of disbelief. I sat opposite him, my hands gripping the armrests of my leather chair so hard my knuckles were white. I was 51% owner of this company. I had built it from a pickup truck and a toolbox into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I thought I knew where every nail and every beam went. I was wrong. "Look here, Bernie." Richard said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, as if he were breaking the news of a terminal illness. He turned the laptop toward me. He highlighted a row in yellow. "Project 404, he read. "Roof repair and structural reinforcement at the residential property on the corner of Oak and Elm. The invoice is dated last November. The amount is $12,500. I stared at the screen. The numbers were crisp and clear. The invoice looked legitimate. It had the company logo. It had a vendor number. It had Jason's digital signature authorizing the payment. "There is just one problem," Richard continued, watching my face. "I know," I whispered, closing my eyes. "I know the problem, Richard." I didn't need to look up the property records. I knew the corner of Oak and Elm. It was a vacant lot. We had demolished the condemned structure there 3 years ago. We sold the land to the city for a park that was never built. There was no roof to repair. There was no structure to reinforce. It was a patch of weeds and dirt. He paid $12,000 to repair thin air. I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "And it is not the only one," Richard said, turning the screen back to himself. He began to scroll down. The yellow highlights appeared again and again, like warning lights on a dashboard. "Here is a basement waterproofing job in Hyde Park for $9,000. We haven't worked in Hyde Park since 2010. Here is an electrical grid upgrade for a warehouse in Cicero, $14,000. Always under the $15,000 threshold, Bernie." I nodded slowly. I had set that threshold myself. I had told Jason that as CEO he had autonomy for any expense under 15 grand. Anything over that required my countersignature. I thought I was empowering him. I thought I was teaching him leadership. Instead, I had given him the perfect ceiling for his theft. He had been skimming just under the radar, bleeding the company dry one small cut at a time. "What is the total?" I asked. I needed to hear the number. I needed to feel the weight of it. Richard took a deep breath. He tapped a few keys and a bold number appeared at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Over the last 24 months, Richard said the total amount of authorized payments to these shell vendors is $250,000 and 43 cents. $250,000. The room seemed to tilt. That was $250,000. That was the retirement fund for my foreman, Mike. That was the new equipment we needed for the spring season. That was my blood, my sweat, and my time stolen by the boy I had taught to ride a bike. "Where did it go?" I asked. "The money didn't just vanish, Richard. It went somewhere." Richard opened another window. He had been busy. This was why I paid him the big retainer. He had traced the routing numbers from the fake vendor, a shell company called JK Consulting, which was painfully unoriginal. 70% of it went here, Richard said, pointing to a graph. An offshore account in the Caribbean. We cross-referenced it. It is a holding account for a high-stakes online poker site. "Gambling," I muttered. He didn't just borrow money from the Harrisons. He was hemorrhaging money to a casino on the internet. "And the rest?" I asked. Richard hesitated. He looked uncomfortable. "The rest went to pay off credit card bills. specifically a card in Tiffany's name. I pulled the merchant codes, Bernie. It is mostly luxury retail. I looked at him. Be specific, Hermes Richard said. Gucci. And a significant charge at a plastic surgery clinic in the Gold Coast. I felt the bile rise in my throat. My son stole $250,000 from his father's company. He gambled away the majority of it, and with what was left he bought handbags for the woman who had smashed a glass into my face. He funded her lifestyle with my labor. He was not just a bad son. He was a predator. He was an embezzler. I stood up and walked to the window. The night was black, devoid of stars. I saw my reflection in the glass. The bandage on my forehead, the lines etched deep around my mouth. I looked like a man who had survived a war only to be stabbed in the back by his own lieutenant. This is a felony, Bernie Richards said from behind me. This is grand larceny, embezzlement, fraud. We have the evidence. The digital trail is undeniable. I can call the police right now. They can pick him up at the motel. He will be in a cell next to his wife by sunrise. I stared at the darkness. It would be so easy. One phone call. The sirens would wail again. Jason would be handcuffed. Justice would be swift. But as I stood there watching the red light of the security camera blink in the reflection of the window, I realized that prison was too good for him. Prison was a pause. If I sent him to jail now, he would play the victim. He would blame the gambling addiction. He would say he was sick. He would get a lawyer who would plead for rehab instead of time. And Tiffany. She would wait for him playing the dutiful wife, spending the money they had stashed away. No, I said. Richard stopped typing. No, Bernie. He stole $250,000. I turned around. The anger was gone from my face, replaced by something colder, something harder. It was the look of a man who was done reacting and was ready to start executing. No police, I said. Not yet. Why, Richard asked, bewildered. Because if I arrest him now, he still has hope, I said, walking back to the desk. He still thinks he is smart. He still thinks he is entitled to my legacy. I don't want to just punish him, Richard. I want to break him. I sat down and leaned forward, my eyes locking with Richard's. I want to take away the one thing he loves more than the gambling and more than Tiffany. I want to take away his expectation. What do you mean? Richard asked. I mean, we are going to offer him a truce, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. We are going to invite them to a meeting. We are going to tell them that I am tired, that I am old, and that I want to settle this. You want to settle? Richard asked, his voice rising. After what they did, I want to offer them a trust fund, I said. A massive one. $2 million. Richard stared at me as if I had lost my mind due to the head injury. Bernie, have you gone senile? You want to give the thief $2 million? I tapped the table with my finger. I want to show him $2 million. I want him to sign for it. I want him to believe that he has won, that he has outsmarted the old man again, and then I want to watch him destroy himself with it. I pulled a notepad toward me and picked up a pen. Draft a trust agreement, Richard. Make it watertight. But I want a clause, a hidden clause. A trigger that snaps the trap shut the moment he makes a mistake. Richard looked at me and slowly, the confusion on his face turned into understanding. He saw the strategy. It wasn't about mercy. It was about total annihilation. You want to bait him, Richard said softly. I want to see if he is capable of redemption. I lied. But we both know he isn't. I want to give him enough rope to hang himself, Richard. And I want the knot to be tied by his own greed. I looked down at the spreadsheet one last time. The number $250,000 burned into my mind. He had taken my past. I was going to take his future. Set up the meeting, I said. Let us see how hungry they really are. The conference room in Richard's law firm was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray Chicago skyline, a table long enough to land a plane on, and air conditioning that kept the temperature at a crisp 65 degrees. I sat at the head of the table, my back to the view, Richard to my right. We were waiting. I had agreed to this meeting against my better judgment, or so I let them believe. In reality, this meeting was the stage for the greatest performance of my life. I adjusted the collar of my shirt. It felt loose. I had lost 5 pounds in 3 days. The stress of discovering my son was a criminal eating away at my appetite. The heavy glass doors opened. Tiffany's lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that was too white, ushered them in. They were dressed for a funeral or a court appearance. Tiffany, usually draped in designer logos and bright colors, was wearing a modest beige cardigan and slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore no makeup, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. It was a costume. She was playing the role of the repentant, stressed-out housewife. Jason walked in behind her, head down, shoulders slumped. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, or perhaps a man suffering from a severe hangover. They sat at the opposite end of the table. The distance between us felt like miles. Mr. Kowalski Sterling began, his voice oily and smooth. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. My clients are devastated by the events of Sunday night. We are here to facilitate healing, not conflict." I didn't say anything. I just stared at Tiffany. I wanted to see if she could hold my gaze. She couldn't. She looked at the table, her hands twisting a tissue. Tiffany Sterling prompted gently. Tiffany took a shaky breath. Then the tears started. They were impressive tears, silent, rolling down her cheeks, accompanied by a trembling chin. "Bernie," she whispered, "I am so sorry. I do not know what happened. I have been under so much pressure lately. With my parents losing everything and Jason's work stress, I just snapped. It wasn't me. That is not who I am." I listened to her sob about stress and anxiety. I listened to her promise that she had already booked an appointment with an anger management counselor. I listened, and all I could think about was the invoice for the Hermes bag she bought with my company's money. That bag cost more than the counseling sessions she was lying about, and the money Richard asked, cutting through the emotional fog. "We are not just here about the assault, Mr. Sterling. We are here about the $250,000 of unauthorized withdrawals from Kowalski Construction." The room went deadly silent. Tiffany stopped crying for a split second, then resumed with more intensity. Jason finally looked up. His face was pale. "It wasn't stealing," Jason said, his voice cracking. "It was a loan, Dad. A temporary bridge loan." "A bridge to where, Jason?" I asked, my voice raspy. "To a poker website." Jason flinched. "You know about that?" "We know everything," Richard said, tapping the thick file in front of him. "We know about the shell companies. We know about the luxury goods. We know about the gambling debts. This is embezzlement, Jason. We can walk out of here and hand this file to the district attorney. You will both go to prison for a very long time." Sterling held up a hand. "Let us not be hasty. My clients acknowledge that mistakes were made regarding corporate funds. They are willing to make full restitution. With what money, I asked. They are broke. That is why they stole it in the first place." "We will sign a promissory note," Jason said eagerly. "We will pay you back every cent, Dad, with interest. We just need time. Please, do not ruin our lives over money. We are family." I looked at them. They were terrified, but they were not sorry. They were sorry they got caught. They were scrambling, trying to patch the hole in the boat before they drowned. It was time to play my card. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. I slumped lower in my chair. I rubbed my eyes, letting my hand shake visibly. I made myself look smaller, older, defeated. "I am tired, Richard," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Bernie," Richard asked, playing his part perfectly. He looked concerned. "I am 70 years old," I continued, looking at the table. "I built this company to take care of my family. And now I am sitting here discussing sending my own son to jail." I looked up at Jason. I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I do not want to spend my last years in a courtroom," I said. "I do not want the Kowalski name dragged through the mud in the press." "Dad," Jason said, leaning forward. "I will drop the charges," I said. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Bernie, you can't be serious. They assaulted you. They stole $250,000. I waved a hand dismissively. "It is only money, Richard. And the cut on my head. It will heal." I looked at Tiffany. Her tears had miraculously stopped. She was watching me with the intensity of a hawk spotting a mouse. But I said, raising a finger, "There are conditions. Anything," Jason said. "Anything you want. First, I want a full confession regarding the money, signed and notarized. Just for my records, so I know I am not crazy. Second, you will start paying it back $500 a month. I know it will take a lifetime, but it is the principle." "We agree," Sterling said quickly. "Absolutely." "And third," I said, pausing for effect, "I realized something this week. I have been holding on too tight. I have been selfish, just like you said, Jason." I saw Jason wince at his own words, but he nodded encouragingly. "I want to make sure the future is secure," I said. "I am going to liquidate a portion of my personal assets, my bond portfolio." Tiffany's eyes widened. She knew about the bonds. She knew they were worth millions. "I am going to set up a trust fund," I announced, "for my future grandchildren, and for you two, to ensure you never have to resort to stealing again." I saw the look pass between Jason and Tiffany. It was electric. They thought I was capitulating. They thought I was a senile old man trying to buy their love back because I was afraid of dying alone. "A trust fund?" Tiffany asked, her voice steady now. How much were you thinking, Bernie?" I leaned back, looking at the ceiling. $2 million. The air left the room. $2 million. It was a fortune. It was freedom. It was the answer to all their prayers. "I will deposit the money into an irrevocable trust," I explained. "It will be managed by Richard. It will be there to support the family." Tiffany reached out and grabbed Jason's hand. She squeezed it hard. I could see the dollar signs spinning in her eyes. She wasn't thinking about the assault anymore. She wasn't thinking about the shame. She was thinking about the RV, the clothes, the trips. She was thinking that she had won. That sounds wonderful, Dad," Jason said. "Thank you. Thank you for forgiving us. I am not doing it for you," I lied. "I am doing it for the family name." "So here's the deal," I said, sitting up a little straighter. "Richard will draw up the papers. The confession, the repayment plan, and the trust agreement. We meet here on Friday. You sign the confession, I sign the request to drop the criminal charges, and we execute the trust." "We will be there," Sterling said, closing his notebook. Tiffany stood up. She looked like a different person. The slump was gone. The energy was back. She looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of triumph. She thought she had broken me. She thought her violence had yielded a $2 million payday. "Thank you, Bernie," she said. "You are doing the right thing." I watched them leave the room. Jason actually held the door for her. They walked out with a bounce in their step. They were already spending the money in their heads. The door clicked shut. The silence returned. Richard looked at me. He stopped pretending to be angry. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. "You deserve an Oscar for that," Richard said dryly. I didn't smile. I felt sick. I had just promised a fortune to the people who hurt me. "Is the clause ready?" I asked. Richard nodded. Addendum B, the forfeiture clause. It is buried in the legal jargon on page 42. If they commit a single crime or if any past undeclared fraud comes to light after the signature, the trust dissolves and the money goes to the charity of your choice. "And the confession they are going to sign?" I asked. "It is admissible in court," Richard said. "If the trust is voided, we can use their own confession to prosecute them for the embezzlement later." "Good," I said. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the street. I saw Jason and Tiffany walking out of the building. They were hugging. They were celebrating. They had no idea that they were about to sign their own death warrant. "They think it is a gift," I whispered. Richard came to stand beside me. "It is not a gift, Bernie. It is a test." "And they are going to fail it," I said. "Because sharks cannot stop swimming and thieves cannot stop taking. They will slip up. And when they do, I will not just have a glass shard to show the judge. I will have their signatures on a confession and a violated contract worth $2 million. "Let them have their victory lap," I said, turning away from the window. Friday is going to be a bloodbath. Friday arrived with a gray, relentless drizzle that washed over the Chicago skyline, turning the city into a blurred painting of steel and concrete. It was the perfect weather for an execution, although the victims walking into the conference room didn't know they were on death row. They thought they were walking into a bank vault to collect a prize. I sat in the same leather chair as before, my hands resting on the cane I had bought at a drugstore that morning. I didn't need the cane. My knees were fine and my balance was perfect. But the cane was a prop. It signaled frailty. It signaled a man who was physically and emotionally done with fighting. It made them lower their guard. Richard sat next to me, a silent sentinel. In the center of the mahogany table sat the document, the trust agreement. It was a thick stack of paper bound in a blue legal folder. 2 inches of dense legal jargon that stood between my son and $2 million. To Jason and Tiffany, that document looked like a winning lottery ticket. To me, it looked like a bear trap hidden under a pile of fresh autumn leaves. The door opened and they entered. The transformation in their demeanor from our last meeting was almost insulting. The tears were gone. The modest clothes were gone. Tiffany was wearing a sharp blazer and her favorite pearl earrings. Jason had shaved and wore a tie that I recognized because I had bought it for him 3 Christmases ago. They walked with a bounce in their step. They tried to suppress it, tried to look solemn and respectful, but the greed was leaking out of them like radiation. They could smell the money. "Good morning, Dad," Jason said, his voice smooth. He reached out to shake my hand. I took it. His palm was sweaty. "Good morning, son," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. "Thank you for coming." Tiffany sat down, her eyes immediately darting to the blue folder on the table. She licked her lips. It was a subtle movement, unconscious, but I saw it. It was the look of a predator spotting a wounded animal. "We are just glad we can put this behind us," Tiffany said. "We want to move forward, Bernie, as a family." I nodded slowly, letting out a heavy sigh. "That is all I want too, Tiffany. Peace. I just want peace." Richard cleared his throat and pulled the document toward him. He opened it with a crisp snap of the paper. The sound echoed in the quiet room. As we discussed, Richard began his tone purely professional. "This is the Bernard Kowalski Irrevocable Family Trust. It is funded with a principal amount of $2 million liquidated from Mr. Kowalski's municipal bond portfolio." I saw Jason's eyes widen when he heard the confirmation of the amount. $2 million. He was doing the math in his head. He was calculating how many hands of poker that could buy how many months of luxury living it could secure. Richard continued flipping through the pages. "The structure is standard. The trust will provide a monthly stipend to the beneficiaries, Jason and Tiffany Kowalski, for living expenses, medical costs, and maintenance of the family estate. The principal is to remain invested, but the dividends are substantial. Excellent, the lawyer, Mr. Sterling said. He was beaming. He was probably thinking about his commission. It appears everything is in order. We have a few formalities to go through, Richard said. He turned to page 10. Here we have the repayment agreement for the unauthorized corporate withdrawals. By signing this, you acknowledge the debt of $250,000 to Kowalski Construction to be repaid via deductions from your trust stipend over a period of 20 years. Jason waved his hand dismissively. Yes, yes. We agreed to that. Deduct whatever you need. He didn't care. He was getting free money. Paying back what he stole with money I was giving him didn't feel like a penalty to him. It felt like a wash. He was so eager to get to the signature page that he was barely listening to the terms of his own probation. Richard flipped through more pages. He talked about tax implications. He talked about trustee oversight. He talked about investment strategies. Jason and Tiffany were nodding their heads, bobbing like plastic dolls, saying yes to everything, understanding nothing. They were bored. They wanted the check. And finally Richard said, stopping at page 42, "We have addendum B." I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hands on top of the cane. This was the moment. This was the kill shot. Richard adjusted his glasses. This is the conduct clause. It is standard in trusts of this magnitude to protect the principal from misuse. It states that the beneficiaries must remain in good standing with the law. Tiffany laughed, a light tinkling sound. Well, we are certainly not planning on robbing any banks. Richard didn't smile. The clause specifies that if any beneficiary is convicted of a crime, misdemeanor, or felony against the grantor or his estate, their interest in the trust is immediately revoked. Furthermore, and this is important, if any past fraudulent financial activity, currently unknown to the grantor, is discovered after the execution of this document, the trust is voided retroactively, and the funds revert to a charitable remainder. It was a mouthful of legalese. It was designed to sound boring. It was designed to sound like boilerplate text that lawyers put in to bill extra hours. Jason looked at the page. The text was dense, single-spaced. He didn't read it. He glanced at the clock on the wall. He was probably thinking about lunch. Standard stuff, Jason said. Good standing. Got it. Where do we sign? My heart hammered against my ribs. He didn't ask what defined fraudulent activity. He didn't ask if the conduct included the things he had already done but hadn't confessed to yet. He assumed that because I was creating the trust, I had forgiven everything. He assumed the slate was wiped clean. He didn't realize that I wasn't wiping the slate clean. I was preserving the evidence in amber. Right here, Richard said, pointing to the line at the bottom of the page. And initials on each page, please. Jason picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. He uncapped it. The scratching sound of the nib on the paper was loud in the silence. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He signed his name, Jason Kowalski. Then he slid the document to Tiffany. She didn't hesitate. She didn't read a single word. She signed with a flourish, looping the T and the Y, as if she were signing an autograph. They pushed the document back to Richard. Done, Jason said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied exhale. I looked at the signatures. They were perfect. They had just signed a contract that said in essence that if I caught them doing anything else wrong, or if I found out about anything else they had done in the past, they lost everything. And the beauty of it was I already knew about the things they hadn't confessed to. I knew about the safety deposit box under Tiffany's maiden name. I knew about the second set of books Jason kept for the side jobs. I was just waiting for the ink to dry to use it. Richard closed the folder. Congratulations, he said, his voice flat. The trust is now active. Jason stood up and walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy like a burden. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "You won't regret this. We are going to make you proud." I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the boy who had turned into a thief. "I know, Jason," I said softly. "I know exactly what you are going to do." Tiffany came over and gave me a stiff hug. She smelled of expensive perfume bought with my money. "I will see you on Sunday for dinner," she asked. "We can celebrate." "I am not feeling up to dinner this week," I said, gripping the cane. "I need to rest. I need to recover." "Of course," she said, stepping back. "Take all the time you need. We are here for you." They walked out of the room. Mr. Sterling shook hands with Richard and followed them. I heard them laughing in the hallway. I heard Jason say, "Drinks are on me." The door clicked shut. I sat there for a long moment. The silence of the room wrapped around me. I let the cane fall to the floor with a loud clatter. I sat up straight, the feebleness vanishing from my posture. I rolled my shoulders, releasing the tension I had been holding for an hour. I looked at Richard. He was already locking the blue folder into his briefcase. "They didn't even read it," Richard said, shaking his head. "They didn't read Addendum B." "Greed blinds you, Richard," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "When you are staring at the sun, you do not see the cliff you are walking toward." Richard snapped the locks on his briefcase. "So what now? The trust is active. They have access to the first stipend next month." "Now," I said, looking down at the street where Jason and Tiffany were emerging from the building, high-fiving each other on the sidewalk. "Now we wait for them to get comfortable. We wait for them to spend a little money. We wait for them to think they are untouchable." I watched them get into a taxi. They looked so happy. They looked so victorious. And then I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the Chicago wind we pull the rug. I turned back to Richard. "Do you have the surveillance team ready for tonight?" I asked. Richard nodded. "They are parked outside the motel. They will follow them everywhere." "Good," I said. "Because Jason has money in his pocket now, and a gambler with money is a ticking time bomb. He won't be able to help himself. He will go to the casino, or he will call his bookie, or he will try to cover up one of the old messes he thinks I don't know about." I picked up my coat. "The countdown has begun, Richard," I said. "Let us go. I have a feeling tonight is going to be interesting. The witching hour is usually 3 in the morning, but in my house the demons arrived at 2:15. I was not asleep. Sleep has been a stranger to me ever since I realized my family was a nest of vipers. I was sitting in the dark of my study, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. I was waiting. Richard's surveillance team had tipped me off 2 hours ago. They told me Jason had left the motel in a rental car driving erratically, stopping at a bar known for hosting the kind of people who break kneecaps for a living, and then heading straight here. I knew he was coming. I knew why he was coming. The trust fund we had signed 3 days ago was a promise of future wealth, but Jason had present tense problems. Sharks do not care about future dividends. They care about blood in the water today. I heard the car roll up the driveway. He killed the engine before he reached the garage, trying to be stealthy. It was pathetic. I heard the crunch of gravel under tires, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the silence of the suburbs. Then came the footsteps, slow, hesitant creeping toward the back door. I sat perfectly still in my wingback leather chair. Across my lap lay my old Remington 870 shotgun. It was not loaded. I would never shoot my own son, no matter how much he deserved it. But Jason did not know it was empty. And fear is a much more powerful weapon than buckshot. I heard the jingle of keys. He was trying the back door leading to the mudroom. I heard the metal slide into the lock. Then the confusion. I heard him jiggle the handle. I heard him curse under his breath. He was using the key I had given him 10 years ago, the key to his childhood home. He did not know that key was now useless metal. He did not know that Mike the locksmith had turned this house into a fortress. He tried again harder this time, grinding the key against the tumblers. It refused to turn. Panic makes people stupid. If he had been thinking, he would have turned around and left. He would have realized that a changed lock meant I knew. But he wasn't thinking. He was desperate. I heard him move to the left toward the kitchen window. I knew that window. The latch was sticky. It was the weak point. Then came the sound I had been dreading. The crash. It wasn't a clean break. He must have used a rock from the garden, or maybe the tire iron. The glass shattered with a violence that made me flinch even though I expected it. The sound of shards hitting the tile floor echoed through the house. I stayed in the chair. I controlled my breathing. In, out, in, out. I heard him climbing through. I heard the grunt of exertion as he pulled himself over the sill. I heard his shoe crunch on the broken glass. He was inside. My son, the CEO of my company, the beneficiary of a $2 million trust, was now officially a burglar, a felon. He had just triggered the forfeiture clause of the document he hadn't bothered to read. The money was gone. The future was gone. But he didn't know that yet. He moved quickly now. He didn't go upstairs to the bedrooms. He came straight down the hallway toward the study. He knew exactly where the value was. He wasn't looking for cash. He knew I didn't keep large amounts of cash in the house anymore. He was coming for the display case. The door to the study eased open. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the darkness, dancing across the bookshelves, the desk, the Persian rug. He didn't shine it in my corner. He was focused on the cabinet against the far wall. The cabinet that held my watch collection. I watched him in the shadows. He looked manic. He was sweating, his hair plastered to his forehead. He rushed to the cabinet and smashed the glass front with the butt of the flashlight. He didn't care about the noise anymore. He grabbed the Patek Philippe Calatrava first, then the vintage Rolex Submariner. Those two watches alone were worth $80,000 on the gray market. Enough to pay off a lot of debt. Enough to keep his legs intact. He was shoving them into his pockets, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the Rolex. He was muttering to himself, "Just get it. Just get it and go." I let him fill his pockets. I let him think he had succeeded. I let him turn around to leave. Then I reached out and clicked the switch on the brass lamp beside me. The light flooded the room, harsh and sudden. Jason froze. He spun around, his eyes wide, pupils dilated in terror. He saw me. He saw the cold look in my eyes. And then he saw the shotgun resting on my knees, the barrel pointed loosely in his direction. He made a sound that wasn't quite a scream. It was a strangled gasp of pure fear. He dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, the beam spinning wildly before coming to rest against the desk. "Dad," he whispered. "Don't, please." I didn't move the gun. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the calm authority of a judge passing a death sentence. "Put them back," I said. Jason was trembling so violently, his teeth were chattering. "Dad, listen, I can explain. Put them back." He scrambled to the cabinet. He pulled the watches out of his pockets and placed them on the shelf right next to the shattered glass. He held his hands up, surrendering. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry. I didn't want to do this. I had no choice." "There is always a choice, Jason," I said. "You chose to break into my house. You chose to steal from me, again, after I gave you everything, after I signed the trust." "The trust isn't enough," he screamed, his control finally snapping. "They won't wait for the monthly stipend. They need the money now." "Who?" I asked. "Who owns you, Jason?" He collapsed onto the floor, falling to his knees. He buried his face in his hands, weeping like a child. "The Albanians," he choked out. The guys who run the poker site. I owe them 50 grand. They said if I didn't pay by tomorrow, they would come for me. They said they would hurt Tiffany. I looked at him with disgust. So you decided to hurt me instead. You decided to rob your father to pay off thugs. I was going to buy them back, he cried, looking up at me, his face wet with tears and snot. I swear. Once the trust money started coming in, I was going to buy the watches back and sneak them into the case. You never would have known. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. I would have known, Jason. I always know. And now, thanks to the document you signed on Friday, you have lost the trust too. You broke the law. You broke the contract. It is over. Jason's face went white. No. No, you can't. You can't take it away. We need that money. We have plans. Tiffany has plans. He was spiraling. He was terrified of the loan sharks, terrified of me, and terrified of losing the lifestyle he felt entitled to. I reached for the phone on the side table. I am calling the police, Jason. This is burglary. This is the end. No, he shrieked. He started crawling toward me on his knees. Dad, please, you don't understand. Tiffany will kill me. She told me to do whatever it took. She said we deserved it. I paused, my hand hovering over the receiver. Tiffany told you to rob me, yes, Jason confessed, desperate to shift the blame. She said you owed us. She said you were just a stingy old man sitting on a pile of gold. She said... He stopped. He realized he had said too much. He clamped his mouth shut, his eyes darting around the room. She said what, Jason? I asked, leaning forward. The gun slid slightly on my lap. What did your wife say? Nothing. Jason stammered. She was just angry. Tell me, I commanded, or I call the police and tell them you were armed. Jason looked at the phone. He looked at the gun. He looked at the ruin of his life. She said it wouldn't matter if I took the watches, he whispered, his voice trembling with a horror I hadn't seen before. She said you wouldn't notice. She said you wouldn't be around much longer to miss them anyway. The room went cold, colder than the night air blowing through the broken window. What does that mean? I asked. Why wouldn't I be around? Jason looked down at the floor. He was shaking his head, tears dripping onto the Persian rug. She said your health is failing, Dad. She said you have been getting dizzy lately. She said nature is taking its course faster than you think. My hand froze on the phone. Dizzy. I had been getting dizzy. I had been having headaches. I thought it was stress. I thought it was blood pressure. But how did Tiffany know? Why was she so sure? A terrible dark realization began to form in the back of my mind. It wasn't nature. It wasn't age. Jason, I said, my voice barely audible. Why am I getting dizzy? He didn't answer. He just sobbed. Jason, I roared, standing up, the shotgun clattering to the floor. What did she do? He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth that was far worse than theft. I saw the reflection of a murder. The soup, he whispered. It is in the soup. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. It is in the soup. I looked at my son curled up on my Persian rug, sobbing into his hands. A minute ago he was a burglar. Now he was something far worse. The silence in the room was absolute. The wind howling through the broken window seemed to stop. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to slow down. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, but this time I knew it was not just fear. It was the realization that the sickness I had been fighting for months was not natural. Stand up, I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a father. It was the voice of an interrogator. Jason shook his head, burying his face deeper into the carpet. I can't. I can't. Stand up, I roared, the sound echoing off the mahogany walls. Jason scrambled to his feet, shrinking back against the display cabinet. He looked at the shotgun on the floor, then at me. He looked like a trapped rat. "What is in the soup, Jason?" I asked, taking a step toward him. "You said she told you I would not be around much longer. You said nature was taking its course. But it was not nature, was it?" Jason was hyperventilating. His chest heaved up and down. "Dad, please. I didn't know at first. I swear. She just said she was giving you supplements. She said you needed help relaxing. She said your heart was bad and you needed medicine." "My heart is strong as a bull," I said, staring him down. "I have never had a heart condition in my life." "What kind of medicine, Jason?" He wiped his nose with his sleeve, leaving a streak of mucus. "Sedatives," he whispered. And blood thinners." I felt the room sway. I reached out and gripped the back of the leather chair to steady myself. For the last 6 months, I had been plagued by dizzy spells. I had woken up in the middle of the night, disoriented, my limbs heavy as lead. I had gone to my doctor 3 times complaining of fatigue and vertigo. He had run tests. He had found nothing wrong, attributing it to age and stress. He had told me to eat better. So I did. I ate the meals my loving daughter-in-law prepared for me. The tomato bisque, I said, the memory flooding back. Every Sunday. She insisted on making me tomato bisque. She said it was good for my digestion. Jason nodded, tears streaming down his face again. She crushed the pills into the powder. She mixed it in the kitchen before she brought the bowl out. She said it would just make you sleepy. She said if you were tired, you wouldn't ask so many questions about the money. I looked at him and I saw the lie he was telling himself. He wanted to believe it was just to make me sleep, but we both knew the truth. And the blood thinners, I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Why the blood thinners, Jason?" He squeezed his eyes shut. She said, "Old people fall. She said if you fell and your blood was thin, it would happen faster. You would just go to sleep and not wake up. It would look like an accident, a stroke, or a hemorrhage." I remembered last month. I was walking down the stairs to the basement. I had felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The world had spun. I had grabbed the railing just in time, my knuckles turning white as I hung there gasping for air. If I had fallen, then down 12 concrete steps with my blood unable to clot, I would have bled out on the cold floor before anyone found me. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were actively killing me. "You tried to murder me," I whispered. "My own son. You sat at my table, you drank my wine, and you watched me eat poison." "I didn't do it." Jason screamed, his voice cracking. "It was her. I told her to stop. I told her it was dangerous. But she said we needed the inheritance. She said you were too healthy. She said you would live to be 100, and we would be old and gray before we saw a dime." "And you let her," I said. "You didn't call the police. You didn't warn me. You just watched." I was afraid, he cried. "She is crazy, Dad. You don't know what she is like when she gets angry. She controls everything." "You are a coward," I said, the disgust rising in my throat like bile. "You are a weak, pathetic coward. You would rather see your father dead than stand up to your wife." I looked at the soup tureen sitting on the sideboard in the dining room, visible through the open door. It was a gift from them last Christmas, a vessel for death. I felt a sudden clarity. The confusion of the last few months vanished. The headaches made sense. The bruises that wouldn't heal made sense. I wasn't getting old. I was being assassinated. I walked over to the desk. I picked up the phone. "What are you doing?" Jason asked, his eyes wide. "Dad, please, we can fix this. I will testify against her. I will tell them everything. Just don't call the cops on me." I am the victim here too. When I stopped dialing and looked at him. "You are not a victim, Jason. You are an accomplice. And tonight you are a confessed killer." I punched in the 3 numbers. 9, 1, 1. Jason lunged toward me. For a second, I thought he was going to attack me. I thought he was going to finish the job Tiffany had started. But he stopped short of the desk, collapsing onto the floor again, curling into a ball. He knew it was over. He knew there was no fighting the man who had built skyscrapers. "Operator," a female voice said in my ear. "What is your emergency?" I took a deep breath. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had just survived a war. "My name is Bernard Kowalski. I am at 452 Lakeview Drive. I have an intruder in my home. He is secured." "Okay, sir," the operator said. "Are you injured? Is the intruder armed?" I looked at Jason sobbing on the floor. I looked at the broken window. I looked at the empty spaces in the watch cabinet. "No," I said. "He is not armed. But I need you to send detectives. Not just patrol detectives." "Why is that, sir?" she asked. "Because this is not just a burglary," I said, staring at the top of my son's head. "I have a confession for conspiracy to commit murder. My son and his wife have been poisoning me." There was a pause on the line. Then the operator's voice changed. It became sharper, more urgent. "Officers are on the way, sir. Stay on the line. Do not hang up." I didn't hang up. I stood there holding the receiver, watching the man I had bounced on my knee. The man I had taught to fish, the man I had loved more than my own life. He was broken. He was finished. And as the distant sound of sirens began to wail in the night, cutting through the silence of the suburbs, I realized that the poison wasn't just in the soup. The poison was in the greed. It was in the entitlement. It was in the very soul of the family I had tried so hard to protect. I felt the dizziness again, a wave of it washing over me. But this time I didn't reach for a chair. I stood tall. I stood firm. I would not fall. I would not let them win. I would live. I would live to see them in orange jumpsuits. I would live to see justice. And tomorrow I would pour every drop of soup in this house down the drain. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers cut through the darkness of my living room, painting the mahogany walls in a chaotic, strobing rhythm. It looked like a disco for the damned. Officer Miller was back, the same young cop who had taken my statement at the hospital. But this time he wasn't alone. He had brought the heavy hitters. Detective Henderson stood in the center of my study, a man with a face carved out of granite and eyes that had seen too much human misery to be surprised by anything. I stood by the desk, my posture rigid, the adrenaline finally settling into a cold, hard resolve. I handed Henderson the USB drive from the security system. "This is the video of the break-in," I said, my voice steady. "It shows the forced entry. It shows the attempted theft of property valued at over $80,000. But that is the least of it." Henderson looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "The least of it," I picked up my phone. I had already stopped the recording and saved the file. I pressed play. The sound of Jason's sobbing filled the room, tinny but undeniable. Then came my voice asking the question that had shattered my world. "What is in the soup, Jason?" And then his answer. The confession that would bury him. Sedatives. Blood thinners. She said it would look like an accident. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of my son, who was still curled on the floor, guarded by 2 uniformed officers. Henderson listened to the entire recording. He didn't blink. When it finished, he looked down at Jason with a mixture of pity and professional disgust. "Get him up," Henderson said. The officers hauled Jason to his feet. He was limp, a marionette whose strings had been cut. He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his eyes vacant. As they snapped the handcuffs on his wrists, the metallic click sounded like a gavel coming down. "Dispatch, this is Henderson," the detective spoke into his radio. "We have the male suspect in custody. Upgrade the charges. We are looking at conspiracy to commit murder in the 1st degree and burglary." "Copy that," dispatch replied. Unit 3 is at the motel. They have secured the female suspect. I listened intently. The radio crackled again. Detective, you are going to want to hear this. We tossed the room. We found the stash in the bathroom vanity. We have multiple bottles of crushed pills, no labels. And we found a notebook. A notebook, Henderson asked. Affirmative. It is a spiral-bound logbook. It is titled Dosage for Bernie. It lists dates, times, and amounts mixed into food. It goes back 6 months. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the broken window. A logbook. They hadn't just poisoned me. They had documented it. They had turned my murder into a science project. They had tracked the decline of my health with the same attention to detail that I used to track the foundation of a skyscraper. That book was not just evidence. It was pure evil bound in paper. That is enough, Henderson said. Bring her in. I watched them lead Jason out of the study. He shuffled past me, the smell of fear radiating off him. He paused for a fraction of a second, as if he wanted to say something, maybe ask for forgiveness, maybe beg for help one last time. But he saw my face. He saw the wall I had built. He kept walking. Richard arrived at the front door just as they were guiding Jason down the porch steps. My lawyer looked at the handcuffs, then at the police cars filling the driveway. He looked at me standing in the doorway, a solitary figure against the light of the hall. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The scene spoke for itself. I walked out onto the porch to meet him. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. It is done, Richard, I said quietly. They were poisoning me. For 6 months. Richard's face went pale. He looked physically ill. My God, Bernie, I am so sorry. I don't need sympathy, Richard, I said. I need you to execute the contract. Richard nodded slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket for his phone. He understood. Trigger Addendum B, I commanded. The forfeiture clause. Richard tapped the screen. His fingers moved quickly. It is done, he said. I just sent the formal notice to the trustee. As of this moment, the Bernard Kowalski Family Trust is void. The $2 million has been stripped from the beneficiaries due to the commission of a felony against the grantor. Where does it go? I asked, watching the officer push Jason's head down to get him into the back of the cruiser. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Richard said. Just as we drafted. Good, I said. It will save children who actually want to live instead of funding adults who want to kill. Down the street, I saw another set of flashing lights approaching. It was the second unit transporting Tiffany from the motel to the station. As the car passed my house, I caught a glimpse of her in the back seat. She wasn't crying. She was screaming, her face twisted in a mask of rage, shouting at the glass that separated her from the world. She was still fighting. She still thought she could manipulate her way out of this. She didn't realize that her logbook had already sealed her fate. The neighbors were out now. Mrs. Higgins was on her lawn in her bathrobe, clutching her chest. The young couple from next door was peering through their blinds. They were witnessing the fall of the House of Kowalski. They would talk about this for years. They would whisper about the old man and his ungrateful children. Let them talk. I watched the 2 police cars drive away, their taillights fading into the distance, taking with them the last toxic remnants of my life. I stood there for a long time. I checked my pulse. It was steady. I took a deep breath. My lungs were clear. I was alive. I was alone, yes. But I was alive. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel dizzy. I felt strong. I didn't cry. Tears are for loss, and I hadn't lost anything tonight. I had simply taken out the trash. It has been exactly 365 days since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from my driveway. but the silence that followed has been the loudest thing I have ever heard. They say time heals all wounds, but I have found time is actually a builder. It clears away the rubble of the past so you can construct something new on the foundation. And I have done a lot of building this year. The trial was a spectacle, exactly the kind of drama Tiffany always craved, though I doubt she enjoyed the ending. The judge did not buy the tears this time. He did not buy the story about stress or the manipulation of her parents. The evidence was too overwhelming. The logbook of poison dosages was the nail in her coffin. I sat in the front row every day watching her unravel. When the gavel finally came down, sentencing her to 15 years in a maximum security federal prison for attempted murder and conspiracy, she didn't scream. She just slumped in her chair, a hollow shell of the woman who thought she could outsmart a man who built skyscrapers. Jason was a different story. True to his nature, he folded under pressure. He cut a deal. He testified against his wife, spilling every secret, every plan, every whispered conversation about my death. He saved himself, or at least he tried to. The judge gave him 8 years. It was a mercy he did not deserve, but seeing him being led away in handcuffs, weeping not for his crimes, but for his fate, gave me no joy. It just gave me closure. He looked at me one last time before he disappeared through the side door. I didn't look away. I didn't wave. I just nodded. It was a nod that said goodbye to the son I thought I had, and goodbye to the criminal he had become. As for the Harrisons, Bob and Linda Karma arrived in the form of a tax audit. It turns out that hiding $600,000 in cash from a property sale is frowned upon by the IRS. They seized everything. The bank accounts, the hidden assets, and yes, that brand new $400,000 luxury RV. Last I heard, they are living in a rusted 20-year-old camper in a public parking lot on the outskirts of Tampa, surviving on Social Security and the pity of strangers. They wanted to live on the road. Now they have nowhere else to go. With the legal battles over, I turned my attention to the house. That beautiful Victorian mansion, the one I had poured my soul into, felt different now. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a crime scene. Every corner held a ghost. The dining room where the glass was thrown. The study where the safe was scratched. The kitchen where the soup was mixed. I couldn't breathe there anymore. So I sold it. I didn't haggle. I didn't wait for this market to peak. I sold it to a young family who didn't know its history, a family that would fill it with new innocent memories. The check from the sale was substantial. Added to the liquidated bonds from the voided trust fund, I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I was done hoarding wealth for people who didn't appreciate it. I wanted to build something that would last longer than wood and stone. I wanted to build character. 6 months ago, I cut the ribbon on the Bernard Kowalski Woodworking Center. It is located in the gritty part of the city, the kind of neighborhood where kids grow up thinking their only options are gangs or poverty. It is a state-of-the-art facility. We teach carpentry, cabinetry, and structural engineering. But we teach more than that. We teach discipline. We teach the value of earning your keep. We teach respect. I am there every day. I am not just the donor. I am the head instructor. I look out at the sea of faces, young men and women, who have nothing, who have been dealt a bad hand, and I see a hunger that Jason never had. When I show a 19-year-old kid how to plane a piece of oak until it is as smooth as glass, I see a light in his eyes that money cannot buy. These kids call me Mr. B. They listen when I speak. They thank me when I correct them. They are not my blood, but in the sawdust and the noise of the workshop they have become my family. They are the legacy I was supposed to leave. Now I am far away from the noise of Chicago. I am sitting on the porch of a small cabin in Montana, overlooking a lake that is as still as a mirror. The air is crisp and smells of pine and wood smoke. It is simple here. A one-bedroom log cabin built with my own hands over the summer. No east wing, no marble floors, No hidden cameras, just wood fire and peace. The sun is setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I reach for the bottle on the table next to me. It is a Cabernet, a vintage similar to the one that stained my face that Easter Sunday. But this time the wine is not a weapon. It is a sacrament. I pour a glass. The red liquid swirls, catching the dying light. I hold it up, looking through the ruby depths. I think about the scars on my forehead, now faded to faint white lines. I think about the empty chair at the table. I feel a pang of sadness, fleeting and soft, for what could have been. But it is quickly replaced by a profound sense of relief. I am free. I am not waiting for the next lie. I am not waiting for the next request for money. I am not waiting to die. I raise the glass toward the horizon, where the first stars are beginning to appear. I think of my late wife, the woman who loved flowers and hated conflict. I know she would have been heartbroken by what happened, but I also know she would have been proud of how I ended it. She hated weeds in her garden. She knew that sometimes you have to pull them out by the roots to let the flowers breathe. My love, I whisper into the cool mountain air. I did it. I cleaned house, the weeds are gone, the garden is safe. I take a sip of the wine. It tastes like dark cherries, oak, and victory. I lean back in the rocking chair, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. For the first time in a long time, I am not Bernard the provider, or Bernard the victim, or Bernard the bank. I am just Bernard. And that is enough. The story of how I lost my family to find myself is over. But the story of my life, that is just beginning. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever have to do is protect yourself from the people you are supposed to love. We are taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But I learned the hard way that blood can also be toxic. You are not selfish for drawing a boundary. You are not a villain for closing your wallet to protect your soul. Real love does not demand, it does not steal, and it certainly does not poison. If you are sitting at a table where respect is no longer being served, do not be afraid to get up and walk away. You might lose your seat, but you will save your life. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt used or undervalued by those closest to you, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough choice to save your own peace? I've read every single one. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are the architect of your own dignity. Build it strong.